Hey everybody, welcome to episode 30 of Open Play Podcast. We're a group of friends here to talk about all the changes and what's happening in the world of Warhammer. Here with usual cohorts, Alex.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Preston.
Hello.
And Mason.
Howdy, howdy.
So we're going to skip hobby work this week and just kind of go into all the changes that have gone on since basically 10.5 just came out with all the changes. So hot takes, just high-level views. How does everybody generally feel about these? I think they're good. I think there's a lot of good in there, actually. What about y'all?
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with most of the stuff in here. There's one thing in particular I'm not happy with, and we'll get into that. But as a whole, I think it was improved the game in a lot of different ways, and it sets a good framework for the game going forward.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that definitely is heading in the right direction, especially some of the armies that needed a little bit of love. I think that they're going to have a lot more fun with the core rules changes as well as the specific army changes we've been seeing.
Yeah, I think that there's just enough tweaks to the game that it's going to feel meaningfully different while still being the same game at its core. I think that a lot of the changes are pretty exciting. Some things I hope that they just rat it out, not rat it out, but just kind of clarify a little bit because there's some weird interactions out there. But
I think overall there's a lot of quality of life changes. I think there's, like the pivot change we'll get to here shortly. I think that's just quality of life change that is really nice to have. But yeah, let's start with the core rules updates here. There's a lot to talk about. So, we have the redeployments, which we kind of hit on last time we talked, where it's kind of its own step now before the first turn.
Yeah, they had mentioned that they were setting a redeploy phase, and initially we thought it was just clarification that if your rule didn't specify when to redeploy, you would always redeploy in that phase. But now it looks like that all redeploys, even if they would normally say after rolling off a first turn, now do occur before first turn. So it's sort of a blanket nerf to redeploys all across the board.
But overall, I think it's probably a good change because it meaningfully differentiates between infiltrate is the deployment shenanigans, redeploy does it after deployment's over, and scout lets you move after you receive 5 first turn. That way there's 3 different steps to messing with deployment after the fact.
Yeah, redeploying after first turn was definitely one of the things that some armies had and some armies didn't, like in the free strat sort of and CP generation sort of camp. Like some armies just had access to it, and it was always a powerful tool whenever you saw it. So I don't mind them normalizing it across the board. I would have just liked to see some of the units that lost that advantage getting something else.
Yeah, obviously it's a big nerf to their power level, so it'd be nice if they got something, like that unit got something, some sort of consolidation prize, if not just points drops, but sometimes points can't really make up.
Yeah, even if it was just a 5-point drop, would have been cool, but I'm not super picky about it.
None of the armies I played have it, so.
Yeah, no.
Well, I'm sure one of the Space Marine, because since I have a Space Marine army, I have to consider, I'm sure one of the Space Marine characters do it in one of the detachments, but, none of the ones I played, so.
The Kurt Trail Shaper did it after first turn, and so it would have been cool for him to come down from his 75-point price or whatever he's at right now.
Do we want to hit any of these first page otherwise, or just skip down to the bigger points at this point?
I wrote everything that I want to talk about over there. It's not in order of the document, it's just as I thought about them. Moving models. There are 2 new rules with moving models. One of them is easier than the other to understand. So the first one is that now if you are trying to move in between pieces of terrain, you only have to see if your base fits, not if your model fits. So a lot of the big monsters that would overhang their bases, now you are allowed to move through terrain if the base can make it all the way through. You still can't end a move if you cannot physically place the model there, but it makes it a lot easier for these large models to maneuver around the board, and we'll see that that's sort of a theme they're trying to go for here.
Yeah, I think that's a good rule change. As a player who has certain models that have overhangs, I think that's a positive change.
The other movement rule we can get into here is the introduction of the pivot rule. Now on the surface, the pivot rule is pretty simple. If you have a model and it is not on a circular base, so your vehicles that don't have bases or anything on an oval base or things like that, and you want to change the orientation of that model, you have to pivot it around the center point. If you pivot your model in any way, shape, or form, you lose 2 inches of movement. However, you can pivot it as much as you want. You can pivot it multiple times throughout your move. So you can move it a little bit forward and then pivot it, and then you can move it a little bit forward again and then pivot it again, and you still have only lost that initial 2 inches. So pretty much, if you aren't on a round base, you're paying a 2-inch penalty to pivot, but it lets you pivot as many times as you want. And this change is aimed at simplifying the movement phase. It used to be you had to measure whichever point on your model moved the farthest, which especially when you're rotating things was not the easiest thing to do. So I think Games Workshop with this rule is just trying to, with their whole sort of 10th edition motto, they're trying to simplify the movement phase a little bit, make it, good enough for for the movements, where that 2 inches comes out in the wash with the pivoting. But it has introduced a couple of issues that I'm not particularly happy with, and we can get into those in a second. What do you guys think about pivot?
I mean, this is objectively way more movement for most vehicles, right? Pivoting 90 degrees on almost every vehicle is way more than 2 inches. I know that it creates a more cinematic experience because you're not, Tokyo drifting into combat with your vehicles and stuff like that. But
yeah, and they're not getting locked behind terrain where they have to like back out and move over and things like that.
I guess my question is, do you think they're going to errata this down the road at some point when they realize charging 2 inches to basically Tokyo drift around walls is too much?
So for the main issue this brings up is, like Mason said earlier, some models, when you rotate them, their profile moves forward a lot further than 2 inches when they're only paying 2 inches for that. I mean, it's okay. It's not the end of the world immediately, but where it really matters is with your vehicles, because vehicles measure distances to the hull. So when they're rotating, they are getting that extra sort of movement instead of just like models on a base. Even though their profile might be further forward for line of sight, they're not really getting anything extra. So you can set up things where you can be a charge, and let's say you're sideways with a really long model, and then you get that pivot during your charge, and it actually makes your charges shorter. So some models will get like an 8 or 7 inch charge straight out of reserves because they can set up sideways and then rotate on the charge. Or things like squad tactics, you can line up outside a 9 so that you don't trigger their reactive move, and then on your charge you still have less than a 9-inch charge. And the really big offenders for this rule are vehicles on flying bases, and this is something that I would like to see errata at the very least, if they're going to stick with this pivot update, is that I think any vehicle, regardless of if it's on a circular base or not, should pay that 2 inches per pivot. Because the vehicles on flying bases are typically very long, and then they don't have to pay that 2-inch penalty. So things like the Drukhari Raider, which are very long and thin, don't pay that 2 inches. They get a good 2 to 3 inches forward, and now they're making 6 to 7 inch charges. And they even have stratagem support for it with their blade stratagem in the new Drukhari detachment, the Sky Splinter Assault, and the new version of Tank Shock, which we can get into later. It's just like something I feel like they overlooked or maybe didn't realize the importance of. And I would really just like to see everything paying that penalty if they're going to gain such a big advantage from it.
I've kind of always thought that the flying bases on those models kind of always were like a weird abstract. The model is more than 3 times in each direction, like the length of that the radius of that base. Like you can't measure from that base and have it count as that. You don't measure that for line of sight either. You obviously measure to any part of the model of the whole. Why, if the little spear on the top of the radiator is moving 8 inches before you even start moving towards your charge target, you're giving yourself quite a bit of extra movement there. Do they need to actually pay like to pivot 90 degrees, like the entire? What would it be, like 6 inches of movement? No, probably that's a little excessive. But just because they're on a round base, they should have to pay something.
Now, GW has said that there are frameworks in place to give specific models their own pivot value. Everything has a pivot value of 2, which means they pay the 2 inches for pivoting unless otherwise specified, and they currently don't have anything with a different value specified as far as I'm aware. But it lays the groundwork to maybe look at a model by model basis and give them their own pivot values. It's not something I'd like for GW to be sort of investing their effort in, is figuring out what pivot value to give stuff. But I just think they need to do something. I think the best change would just be keep it how it is. Obviously, it's a little bit harder to measure, but it is by default the most accurate because you're measuring how far the actual thing moves. You're not getting this free movement from pivoting. But if they're going to keep it, like I said, I think everything needs to be paying penalties. We shouldn't be having free movement.
We're also there will be a slight rules dispute. Like, you're not pivoting around the center of your model. You're pivoting around this. I mean, even the example they have in the rules with the Rhino and the Dozer Blade, I would instinctually look at the whole. I would probably have misestimated where the center was because of the Dozer Blade is like shifts it kind of up like an inch. I think that in a tournament that, where a half an inch might actually matter a little bit, you could be theoretically give yourself an extra half an inch or taking a half an inch from your opponent by mistake.
It'll happen. It's going to happen.
Moving on though, with our last movement change, the Primarchs, the Imperial Primarch specifically. So Guilliman, the Lion, and Belisarius Call all can now breach through walls, similar to infantry and beasts. So it's a nice little buff to their movement.
Just Kool-Aid Man right through.
I mean, you're probably still not going to run them. Honestly, I don't remember if they got substantial points drops or not, but that's what they needed because it wasn't the fact that they were slow that was the problem. It was the fact that they just were not worth that many points for model that was relatively easy to kill for its profile.
I don't think Gilliman or the Lion changed at all. Belisarius Call, he didn't change in points either, but he did get a buff. He went from 6-inch move to 8-inch move. And he got a buff to one of his auras, so being able to keep up with the army is a nice change for him.
Well, now the that unit with a big old egg base, Belisarius Call can go through walls just like the Triumph can. She's not the only egg base in town.
There are some changes to some of the core stratagems and abilities in the game. So we've seen consistently 2 core abilities, Vect and Free Strats, sort of across the game. The Free Strat ability typically said, once per round or once per turn, you can use a stratagem for free, and you can use it again if you've already used it already. This caused a problem at the start of the edition on nice 2 CP strats like Fights First and things like that. So then GW eroded it to say, hold on. You can only use free stratagems if they're a battle tactic. And then they sort of started balancing free strats by changing which strats were battle tactics and which ones weren't. But it was very clear that this was a band-aid fix because there were some detachments that had 0 battle tactics and some of them which had 5. And so now they've come back and they've said, okay, free strats, instead of being free, they now reduce the cost of a stratagem by 1. So your 1 CP strats will be free, your 2 CP strats will cost 1, and they're no longer restricted to battle tactics. But you still cannot double up on them. And I think overall, now that we've had a year of sort of working with this type of stratagem, I think it's a good change. I like, again, not having that restriction, and you can have things work the way that they were clearly intended to work. But we're not going to go back to the days of 2 Custodes units both fighting first, and they literally sat there and were unkillable.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of that. I do like the just discounted. I just discount a stratagem. I don't make it free, so I can't do a 2 CP stratagem to do it for free. I think that sounds more fair. I'm not in love with the change with effect because of some of the implications of it. So basically all the units that have a vect and any rule in the book that says after your opponent uses a stratagem, you can increase the cost by 1 every time they use it moving forward. Now it is any unit or whenever you use a stratagem within 12 inches of that model, it costs 1 more.
So it's not for the rest of the game anymore, and it's not restricted to battle tactics.
Correct. It is any strat, and it is just that specific instance of using it, but it's every time you use it. So or it's every time you use a strat within 12 inches of them. So if you re-roll a charge and then want to give your guy's lance or something, well, those 2 1 CP strats now are 4 CP total, which is a big swing in CP economy when the CP economy is not really set up for that, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's definitely a switch. Previously, the good Vect units were the ones that would sit in the corners and sort of do the ugly jobs of screening and doing actions and things like that, because you wanted to keep them on the field as long as possible to Vect the stratagem when they came up. But now, with the way it's a short aura and you kind of want to get as much use of it as possible, you want it on sort of the opposite role of jamming them into the center of your opponent's army, tagging as many units with that 12-inch aura to say, no, you, none of you can use stratagems for this turn.
Yeah, so now instead of your Phobos librarian who's just standing on the back with 5 infiltrators having a Vect, now you wanted to give it to a Terminator captain who's going to run in and punch someone right in the face. You wanted to okay, if you want to interrupt against this squad, it's going to cost you 3 CP. Have a great time with it. Or if you're, I don't know, just throwing out a random example in my head, some sort of dark elfin type people, if you're anywhere on the board near one of their dark elfin leaders, I guess you just pay an extra CP for everything you have, right?
Yeah, so I think this is a bit of a whoopsie by GW. Currently, the Archon for Drakari is a character. He's not an epic hero, it's just a character. And his rule currently says if you're the warlord, you can Vect a stratagem, which is how they sort of got around the 3 Vects in an army. They wanted it restricted to 1 like every other Vect is normally on an epic hero. But right now, the Archon's datasheet ability with that warlord restriction is being replaced by this Lord of Deceit aura, which does not have this restriction. So you could have 3 characters in your army that all have Vect auras and that all love to be in melee and that also have a 2-up invuln. So Drakari is very much posed to be the dominant melee army because they'll have 3 of these guys with stratagem vecting auras that don't die. Hopefully that gets FAQ'd or errated or whatever very soon, but it's something.
Yeah, I do suspect this is also one of those things that if GW doesn't take care of soon, that other local like GTs and stuff like that will put out their own errata in place of it. At least it kind of feels like one of those rules. Like this is obviously an unintended consequence of the rule change, right? GW is definitely like, you know what would buff Drukhari? No one can use strats against them. That's like a crazy person's thing to think. So I expect GW to fix it, but if not, I think the community will do something about it, because that's a very not fun interaction in my opinion. Like you just can't use any of your army strats.
Moving forward, there are some changes to some of the core stratagems as well. So Tank Shock and Grenade both got a little change. These are two ways that people had access to deal mortals. Grenade, you'd roll 66, and on a 4-up you do a mortal. And Tank Shock depended on the strength of the vehicle charging unit. You could do mortals on the charge. So Grenade got a pretty simple change. You cannot grenade if you have fallen back or advanced. So previously, Grenade didn't care about your eligibility to shoot, so things could fall back in Grenade even if they couldn't fall back and shoot. No more. Interestingly enough, you cannot advance in Grenade even if you can advance and shoot, so you can only do a normal move in Grenade, which hurts some of these faster armies like the Elves and like Tau, where the Breachers with Assault love to run around and throw grenades and shoot. I don't think it's the worst. It is what it is. We'll learn to adapt and play around that. Tank Shock got a bit of a bigger change. So previously, you would take the strength of a weapon equipped by your vehicle, and you would roll that many dice, and you would add 2 to it if the strength was higher than the opposing unit's toughness. This was phenomenal on things like Knights, who had, their strength 20 weapons or whatever and were rolling 22 dice. But now it is dependent on the toughness of your vehicle, and you do not get that +2 bonus for any sort of reason. So you just roll your vehicle's toughness, and on a 4 or a 5-up, you'll do Immortal. And it sort of standardizes Tank Shock across the board. Those big giant models with big giant weapons aren't rolling as many dice, but a lot of the units like Rhinos and things like that, the transports that normally were rolling 6 dice for their strength, are now rolling 9 dice for their toughness, so they'll do an extra damage. Again, I think it's a fine change. It just changes the dynamic of what the stratagem is supposed to do, and it sort of flattens the bell curve on what vehicles are damaging with it.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that it just based on the previous way the stratagem worked, it always seemed just easy to just get 6 mortals, just because you're going to roll, for the Lord of Skulls I'd rolled 18 dice, and it's pretty easy to get 6 mortals on that many dice.
Well, in theory that's correct. However, I don't think I've ever rolled 6 mortals for Tank Shock. I think that I've rolled 5, even when I did Tank Shock with the Lord of Skulls.
God, I never did not roll 6.
Oh, must be nice.
It must be nice to be rolling Tank Shock.
You've got Crusher Stampede. Surely there's a stratagem in there.
Yeah, I'll just play like the worst sub faction just so I can Tank Shock.
Seems fair.
There's also a couple changes. Heroic Intervention went down from 2 CP to 1 CP, which greatly increases the flexibility of it, because you can do things like Heroic and then another stratagem once you're in melee, instead of just paying all of your CP to get another unit hit in melee. So that'll definitely change the dynamic. It's a buff to melee armies. And Command Reroll got a change that is sort of applicable to any sort of dice rerolls. They have specified that you are allowed to reroll a dice even if you have fast rolled a batch. So previously, it used to be if you wanted to reroll a dice, you would have to slow roll, because by fast rolling, you're getting a bit of information about the rest of your dice rolls that you wouldn't normally. GW has magnanimously said, we don't care if you get that little bit of extra information, just roll your dice, speed the game up, and then you can still reroll 1 if you want. And this applies to any sort of rerolls, so like the Eldar, who could reroll 1 hit and 1 wound, you don't have to slow roll that. You are allowed to substitute dice on a reroll as well, so Eldar and Sister specifically can use their Fate and Miracle dice on rerolls. Just sort of all across the board aim to speed up the game of dice rolling, which it's a buff to the units that can take advantage of it, but it's also, I'm not opposed to anything that doesn't slow the game down.
It doesn't make it that much stronger, right? Like it's only like a slight increase. Like every now and then you'd roll like, oh, I have to take 3 saves and I have to pass 2 of them. You fail the first one and you're like, well, I failed the second one. Do I want to bank on passing the third one and do CP reroll this? Well, now you just get to roll all 3 at once, so you get to know for sure whether or not you need to waste a CP. So I'm pretty neutral about it. Some people just did this for the record. Like some people just would pick up a handful of dice and roll them and then say, oh, I'll CP reroll this 1 failure. And now it just is, it's written to law. Now this is how it works. So it's nice that way, I guess.
And then the last couple of blanket sort of game changing decisions GW has made. The first one comes to indirect fire. So similar to Overwatch, which will only hit on unmodified 6s, now any weapon that is firing indirectly can only hit on an unmodified 4+. So if you roll a 1, 2, or 3 on the dice, no matter what other buffs or things like that you have to your indirect fire, they will always fail, which I think is a great change.
It is a good change. It makes indirect fire less oppressive when you have a full guard army that's all indirect fire.
They also do have to go back to the drawing board on some of the spotter units, I think, like the Scout Sentinels for Guard and what's the one for Death Guard that spots for the Plagueburst Crawlers? Lord of Virulence?
Yeah, the Lord of Virulence.
Yeah, which are currently designed to make indirect hit on better numbers, and now they won't anyway, so maybe need to go back to the drawing board on those, but I am perfectly okay with unmodified 4-ups and indirect.
I think most people are, other than the players that relied on it. But, you know, as one of our hosts would say, they just have to learn how to play the game.
They're just gonna have to figure it out.
And last, to change to Super Heavy Walker, specifically on Knights, I don't think it changes on things that aren't Knights. I could be wrong about this, but Knights with Super Heavy Walker, which are going to be your big Knights, both Chaos and Imperial version, got a buff to their movement. So Super Heavy Walker previously just said you could move over terrain that's 4 inches tall as if it wasn't there, and infantry and beasts and swarms as if they're not there. Now, Super Heavy Walker lets you move over non-Titanic units as if they're not there, and also you can move through terrain that is greater than 4 inches tall as if it was not there. But if you do so, you roll 1d6, and if you roll a 1, you're battle shocked. Generally, you're going to be okay with taking that, even if you take the battle shock. It's an elegant solution to help these larger models out for Knights, besides just giving them better stats. Just helping them move around the board a little bit more, but also introducing that risk that, you know, maybe they can't take an action, or maybe they can't stand on this objective, or things like that.
Realistically, there's only so cheap you can make like a Knight chassis, right? And it still work within the confines of the game. So this is a pretty elegant change. I like this.
Yeah, I mean, what Knight player doesn't want to just ignore, you know, cost of movement, possible battle shock, but ignore terrain and just fucking march it forward.
I would like it to have to eat some movement penalty too, like
a -2 to the move or something.
Yeah, I think I think -2 is totally fair. Like that's fine. But overall that's fine. I think that Knights aren't really tearing up the game right now, and if this is the difference maker, then maybe we should go back to the drawing board and consider that change. But right now, I think this is a totally fine change. I think this is a good change.
Beyond this, there's a lot of changes to the core rules, and not changes as more so clarifications for a lot of the game mechanics. If you want to look at them, feel free to pull up the document. We just went over and highlighted the ones that we feel are going to impact the game the most.
Yeah, there was also a lot of just things where they would codify either data slate changes or rules commentary changes into the actual core rules too. So,
what do you think about the mortal wounds change, though? I think that's also a fairly decent change.
Yes, so now they have specified that all devastating wounds are mortal wounds, but they still don't spill over, which basically means that anything that has protection against devastating wounds anything that has protection against mortal wounds now also protects against devastating wounds. So the Custodes feel no pain and talons, Drago leading a unit, things like that. Anything that protects against mortals now also protects against devastatings.
Which is how it probably should have been the whole time, right?
Yeah, I think there was a pretty clear intent when Devastatings did Mortals at the beginning of the edition that these rules would protect against it. And instead of updating all of those rules, they just went the other way around and updated the core rule.
And that also counts for Hazardous, right? Isn't that the change they made?
Yes, Hazardous always deals 3 mortal wounds now as well. Previously, it only did mortal wounds if you were a character, monster, or vehicle. Now, even if you're infantry, you do still take 3 mortals, which means you do get a chance for a Feel No Pain against them.
But it doesn't spill over to the squad. It's still allocated to the selected model.
Correct. But multi-wound models that have a Feel No Pain and a Hazardous weapon now have a chance to survive their weapon blowing up.
They somehow made Hazardous less relevant. Like, you still always overcharge, right? Like, why would you not? But your guardsman, if he overcharges, he doesn't kill 2 of his buddies. At least he only kills himself.
Yeah, so anything else we want to hit on the core rules change? Or I think we're good to move on from here.
One thing I did forget when going over the stratagems. So lone op stratagems. So this is only applicable to the lone op stratagems. This is not applicable to the lone op ability. But there are a few stratagems in things like Canoptic Court and Vanguard Invasion that pseudo give you lone op. They say when you're targeted by an enemy attack, you pay 1 CP and you can only be targeted if they're within 12 inches. Back in January, this was a stratagem for Chaos Space Marines, the Nurgle strat, and it got changed to be 18 inches instead of 12. And GW liked that change so much that they gave it to everybody. So now if you have a stratagem that gives you the lone up ability, it only applies within 18 inches and not 12.
That's probably, and it's still a very strong stratagem.
And lastly, another change, any stratagem that gives you another unit during the battle, so the guard reinforcements, recruit join the hunt, they still will cost 2 CP, but they can only be used once per battle, which I think is maybe the most serious change. It sort of fundamentally changes how those armies are designed to work if you can only bring back one unit instead of the 2 or 3 or 4 you were getting previously.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely hurts those specific detachments. 'Cause, we did see some Unending Swarm play, but it's not going to be great.
I think it's a change a bit ahead of the new secret mission system that wants you to have battle line in certain locations around the board and things like that, where you can't constantly be bringing those battle line back and threatening to do secret objectives. I don't know if this was the best way to change it. I think it is a way to change it, and it's what they've gone with. So we'll just have to see if those detachments get anything in return for losing out.
I mean, the most Tyranids wins are Unending Swarm, even though they're, at a very low win percentage rate in general.
Yeah, I think that ultimately it is very good, or it would show that a good player was able to use any relevant stratagems and still have enough to bring back the unit that died and make sure they weren't using multiple units a turn in guard. I had never played against Endless Multitude Tyranids in this edition, so I don't know how hard it was for them.
They could bring back gargoyles, which was gross.
Well, that's heinous, and that's really annoying because gargoyles were just too cheap. What I'm hoping is the meta just shapes up where we don't need to bring back multiple units a turn throughout the game. Like, bringing back one is still powerful enough that we can still feel it, but time will tell on that one.
So let's transition into some faction rule changes here. So obviously, Sisters just got a codex. They didn't get any. Congratulations. You just got point hikes.
Point hikes out the wazoo.
Not needed, though.
Yeah, they needed them for sure. Definitely some of the units felt it more than others. Zephyrum went up 50% from 60 to 90 because they got sustained instead of strength +1, which, Repentia went up 75% from 110 to 180 because mostly of the new Penitent Host attachment and getting sustained on their weapons. I think everything in the army went up except for Arco Flags, who lost their 4 up Field No Pain and went down to a 5 up Field No Pain, and so they went down 10 points, which is sort of an egregious change to me because they also got a 6 up Invuln, and I think they're still going to be worth 20 to 30, especially without that extra 10 points on them anymore.
Yeah, I still think you'd be running Arco Flags out there quite a bit, but...
The army just got sort of a fundamental rework. It is a completely different army with the new units and the new codex and the new rules. I would not expect anything, not nothing, but very little of what we saw from Sisters before is going to stay the same. Previously, it was a very fast, skirmishy, tradey, mission-focused army that could reliably score a lot of points, and now it's more of an elite glass cannon Alpha Strike army because their units are a lot more expensive, and so you can't afford to lose as many, whereas before you were wanting to lose them because they were so dirt cheap. You were just forcing engagements that the opponent couldn't afford to take. So it'll require sort of a mindset flip from players, and I don't expect anything within the next month to be solved, but I'm excited to see where the army goes from here.
So I think the largest sweep of change is pretty much AdMech. AdMech rules all got updated, a whole bunch of weapon updates over, and with the point hikes that I think will make up for all this. I still think AdMech actually looks like it could be pretty solid, actually.
Yeah, so there's an update to the Doctrinas, which is their army rule. Previously, you choose one of two, and they gave you a small buff, and they gave you another small buff if you were in your deployment zone or attacking models in their deployment zone. Now, they still give you that small buff, so Protector Imperative gives you heavy on all your ranged weapons, and Conquer Imperative gives you assault on all your ranged weapons. Previously, Protector gave you Armor of Contempt if you were inside of your deployment zone, and now it is if you are targeted in melee, you're -1 to hit if you're battle line or within 6 inches of a battle line unit, which is a nifty buff, and it applies across the board, not just in your deployment zone. And finally, Protector Imperative also gives you +1 ballistic skill to all your ranged weapons, so your ballistic skill 4 army is now hitting on 3s, which is a great buff for them to have because previously they were hitting on 4s with pretty much no rerolls. And Conquer Imperative, like I said, you still get assault on all your ranged weapons. They used to give you +1 AP if you were attacking units that were in their deployment zone. Now you get +1 AP if you're battle line or within 6 inches of battle line, so bringing that over as well. And finally, you get your weapon skill improved by 1 across the board. So your weapon skill 4 units go to weapon skill 3.
There's a lot of, so when 10th came out, like Botan, for instance, went to a 4-up army for hitting with their ballistic skill. A lot of these armies seem to be 4-ups, but AdMech is now like a 3.5 up generally.
Yeah, I don't know which of these you would want to improve more, honestly. Previously, they were kind of a shooting army. They obviously didn't do a ton of damage, but they like to shoot more than they like to hit. But now, getting assault and melee skill +1 in the same sort of imperative, so you can buff your shooting and your ranged weapons at the same time. So you're shooting and your melee weapons at the same time. It's okay, but ballistic skill +1, heavy, you can get like your big vehicles hitting on 2s. We'll have to see.
I mean, there's a couple notable changes with weapons too. Like the Ferromite cannon here was 2d6 damage. Now it's a d6 +1, which I think is probably better.
You think 2d6 is worse than d6 +1?
I think the change will get you more damage, honestly.
No, it won't. It's flat worse.
I've been known to be incorrect.
I thought it was 2d3 also, though.
I doubt they'd have the damage of a weapon, I'm gonna be honest. But generally, if you look at the AdMech MFM, a lot of the units went up in points, and if they went up in points, they probably got a buff to their weapon. So the Onagers are now 12 attacks apiece, instead of 6 attacks with Twin Linked. The Eradication Beamer went from something like D6 attacks to 2D3, I believe. The Ruststalkers went +1 attack, +1 strength, I think. Just general increases in damage across the board you'll see on a lot of their units, and then they took like a 5 or 10 points hike, which I think is what everybody was asking for, units that do more and cost more, not units that do nothing and cost less. I don't think they are going to suddenly be north of that 50% win rate. None of their detachments got any changes that I'm aware of, and they still sort of have the same flaws where they're a, ballistic weapon skill 3.5 army, and they don't really have rerolls. I think they'll be a little bit south of 50%, but I think they're going to be north of where they are now.
Yeah, you can play them, right? Which is a huge improvement over where you were before. I'm glad they made all these changes. Now they can buff World Eaters, because now they don't have to worry about buffing AdMech.
41% win rate, so hopefully they'll be north since they're in the last place currently.
I just want to say the fact that 41% win rate is last place shows how far the edition has come, though. I mean, that's a far cry from where it was for a long time.
We were sitting at like 36% Votan, I think.
That was the first data sheet, right? Yeah, like showing up to your games and like if you play your best, you're only like you only win a third.
The average player goes like 1-4 at an event.
Yeah, that's rough.
Yeah, 31% for the July 5th balance update from 1.1.
Ugh. And we had, 6 armies south of 40%, and now we have 0?
Yeah, GW's done a very good job at balancing the game thus far, so...
So, moving on to the rest of the Imperial updates. Custodes were another big winner, similar to AdMech. They got buffs to their detachments, and they got points drops on their units. So, the Talons are a beneficiary of the game-wide protection against mortals is protection against devs. And the Orc Champion's attachment, which previously gave your characters reroll 1s to wound, now gives everybody in a character unit reroll 1s to wound. So it's a big damage buff.
I would like to butt in and say one thing, though, as far as points drops. I mean, are they really points drops if it's Forge World points drops?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, really?
Venatari going from 200 to 165 is a little obscene to me, because I thought they were pretty good before. I think they're going to need a second look, maybe in the next data slate, but...
all that's going to be gone next edition, probably.
They survived this codex, so you've got another couple of years.
Anyway, sorry to interrupt, but I just felt Forward World point drops just really don't count, but please continue.
Well, I'm surprised that Venatari didn't just get wrapped into the regular codex, to be honest.
I'm surprised that they changed Forge World models at all, because normally they change the regular models and not the Forge World ones, and instead they dropped all the Forge World ones and kept all the normal ones the same. But going on to their detachments, so Orc Champions got that buff to reroll wounds, and Shield Host, which previously was you got sustained or lethal, and then once per game you got 5-up crits and +1 AP. Now every turn you can decide, would you like 5-up crits or +1 AP? So just more consistent throughout the game.
Yeah, I think Adeptus Custodes players should be happy. I think they'll also bump up a percent or two in their win rates.
So Eldar didn't get any changes to their rules. They did get some points hikes and some points drops. Mostly hikes on the cheap scoring stuff, Warp Spiders, Shadow Specters, Swooping Hawks, things like that. Fire Dragons all went up. And then they got points drops on all of their, or most of their Phoenix Lords, which is cool. And the Wraith Lord also went down. So 145 for sort of a Dreadnought-esque thing that gets you a Fate Dice in an army that only has 6 Fate Dice now. Maybe worth a second look.
Oh, your rain went up. I didn't see that when I looked before.
Yes, Yvrain went up and the Ravager went down, I think. So they're sort of trying to rebalance Yunari again. Yvrain went up 25.
That's pretty steep. That's kind of a lot, but hey, whatever. She was good, so I mean...
Yeah, Yunari was a really good build. Being able to take Scourge and Mandrakes. Normally you had Swooping Hawks for your up-down unit, and they're like 85 points or something right now, and Mandrakes are still 65, so you could take the Scourge with their Fire and Fade Dark Lances and re-roll a hit and wound for them, and then you could just take a 65 point up-down unit, and it was worth it to take Yvrain.
I'm still not in love with support weapons being 135, even though they only hit on 4s now.
Hit on 4s with a re-roll to hit and wound is sort of a interesting stat line for a model that can kill a Rhino behind a wall.
Yes, that's kind of where I'm at with it. I'm like, they still just murder things really, really well from across the board.
It is the first points updates where the support weapon has not taken a hike, though. They have gone from 80 to 135, and now they're staying there, at least for another 3 months.
Well, we'll see, I guess. That's all we can do. I mean, you only can make 6 hit, it auto hit 6 times, right? Well, 5, I guess, if you only have one of them.
I mean, their win rate's not the greatest currently.
Yeah, they've suffered from a general lack of inability to hold primary. I do think they will get a buff with the new mission because of how secret missions give you that way to shore up your primary, and they have a lot of naturally fast units to take advantage of secondaries when normally those pseudo-fast units that could like move okay and have assault now don't. I think they're in a pretty good position to score points in the new Pariah Nexus pack.
Yeah, I think that Eldar's looking pretty strong. I don't know enough about Eldar to know how these rules are going to change points are going to affect them. So if Preston says it's looking good, he's the one who plays the army. I trust him. Plus it's confirmation bias because I also feel like I should never trust an elf. So
I think they'll continue to hover around that 50%, but I would not be surprised if they were, top 4 in winning events every now and then.
I do feel like Eldar is one of those armies also that like if you have a good matchup to them, like they're nothing to you. And if you have a bad matchup to them, like it's just not even a game, you just lose. So
they do also benefit from the change to indirect. They hated getting their models blown up across the board.
Oh yeah, that is true. So that helps them, even though it hurts the unit that I hate.
Astra Militarum got sort of their own rework. So their detachment rule, Born Soldiers, is gone, and it has changed. So instead of getting lethal hits if you stood still, which was not a real rule on anything that wasn't indirect, now all of your regiment units get lethal hits against non-monsters and vehicles, and all of your squadron units get lethal hits against monsters and vehicles. So they give you lethal hits against the targets that generally they're supposed to be shooting at, and it's not restricted to standing still, which is the thing that everybody in 40k loves because standing still is generally not how to play the game.
You don't want to be standing still. That's not how it works.
Going to see more Dorns coming into play, probably. People are already running them, but still.
They also clarified that the orders on your datasheet are the amount of orders you can issue in a battle round. Previously, it just said, the orders you can issue, and there wasn't a clear... People understood how it was supposed to work, but there wasn't actually a consensus on when that orders refresh and things like that. So now it's written in stone. You get this many orders per battle round. They also got hit, like I said, with that reinforcements change. They can only reinforce 1 unit per battle. They got hit with the indirect changes. Their mana cores and basilisks and all that are now only hitting on 4s, even if you take scout sentinels. And then to compensate for all this, they got some points drops across the board. So the Khazarkin went back down because they're not reinforcing. Basilisk, mana core, death strike, etc. went down because indirect is worse. And surprisingly, in a non-related change, the Rogel Dorn went down, making it a little bit more attractive.
Yeah, ultimately, I think that I think Guard would be a fun army to play against. I mean, who doesn't like getting run at by a bunch of tanks and just said deal with this or you die? I think that losing their indirect platforms hitting on 2s to lethal hits, I think that it is not great for them overall. I think it's a hit to the army, but overall I think the amount of fun that people playing against Guard is going to go up, and I don't think the army's in a bad state. I didn't think it was bad before. So
2 notes. 1, Bullgryns didn't get any points changes, and Bullgryns are still really powerful units. 2nd, the stat line for Armored Sentinels, I mean, they went down in points, but the stat line for those Sentinels are really good for 65 points.
I also believe that Sentinels are both squadron and regiment, so they get lethal hits against everything in the game.
So to all the Marine players listening, this is the change that will be echoed across all the Marine chapters. Impulsors can carry 7 dudes now.
Impulsors and repulsors. So impulsors carry 7 and repulsors carry 14.
That's a pretty substantial change in my opinion, because like I know that on a previous episode we were complaining about the Inner Circle Dark Angels guys because they were in the worst configuration of guys. It was 3 or 6, so you couldn't put them in a character and then put them in a transport. So they were either characterless or footslocking. Blade Guard are the same way. I'm sure there's a couple other units that I don't
Aggressors.
Aggressors are Gravis. They can't go in an Impulsor anyway.
They can go in a repulsor now, though.
Oh, but they can go in a Repulsor, so it would be each one's 2 of them. So
Yeah, so they would take up 12 slots, and the character would be 14.
yeah, so you can put repulsors or you can put a repulsor on the table board with the fire.
The aggressors.
You can only do 3 of them, though, right? Is my math wrong? No.
No.
Yeah. You can put that instead of taking a Land Raider, you can put a repulsor and your Apothecary Biologist. You couldn't bring Marnius Calgar and friends with them, unfortunately, but hey,
Yeah.
sometimes you don't want to pay 260 points for a Land Raider.
275 now, I think, or 285. I think the Redeemer went up 25 points.
Oh, does it? Shows how much I've been paying attention to Space Marines points. I've been all World Eater, baby.
Yeah, the regular Redeemer and the Grey Knights Redeemer both went up 25.
Well, Redeemers are stupid, so they should have gone up.
I
Redeemers
agree.
are very good, so yeah, that is a fair increase.
Black Templars. Black Templars got a codified change. Previously, if you took the Righteous Crusaders detachment, you couldn't take librarians or things like that. Now, if you take any Black Templars unit, you can't take librarians, which is how it should have been. Also, if you take Black Templars vehicles, you can't take the regular Space Marine equivalent of those vehicles. So to the guy out there who was playing 4 Repulsor Executioners in Ironstorm, you can only do 3 now, sorry.
So sad. How terrible. How tragic. No, obviously that still is like a lot of firepower. I'm really glad, spoilers for later, but they also hit Ironstorm Space Marines a little bit too. But we can talk about that when we cross it. Because Blood Angels didn't have any changes, but Chaos Knights we kind of already talked about with the Super Heavy Walker changes. I don't think there were any other differences, right?
The big knights all went down again. They're trying to make them playable. No changes to the war dogs, just the big knights went down. And I think one of the enhancements went down. We'll see.
I still think you run one big knight at most. I think that your war dogs are so strong. Maybe once you get a codex it will matter, but...
Yeah. Also, the change to Tank Shock makes the Lancer less appealing, because previously you could run the Chaos Lancer. I think the Rampager is the one you want, although the Rampager also is not a fan of the Tank Shock change.
You're only rolling 12 dice, so you're only averaging 4 mortals.
We'll see. Chaos Knights, generally, they're getting... The edition has so many changes, it's hard to gauge. Like, they're losing the Nurgling actions, but they're also getting, like, the Titanic 2-drop, and the Titanic action and shoot, and the Super Heavy Walker. There's so many changes going on, it's hard to gauge.
They're all battle lines.
Yeah, they are all battle lines, so any mission rules benefiting battle line will help them. We'll see. I don't expect them to go anywhere out of that, like, 48 to 52 band, but...
I kind of think that both knight armies that's where they should always be. If knights are too good, it's bad it shows that the game's in an unhealthy spot because it's a skew army inherently. But I'm off my soapbox. That was my one thing I wanted to say.
Chaos Space Marines. So the new codex is paying for some sins that maybe didn't actually happen. Warp Talons got their ability changed. Previously, they were eligible to fight and then were not in engagement range. They could go up at the end of their turn. Now they do have to have destroyed an enemy unit. So you can't finish a unit off with a different unit. You can't just use the strat to fall back in Renegade Raiders. You do have to have actually gotten a kill with Warp Talons. And they also took a points hike on top of that. They went from 110 per 5 to 135 per 5.
Yeah, I think that you no longer windmill slam 15 Warp Talons into your army. I think that now you don't take nearly as many. They're still very good.
I think 1 unit of 10 is still fine, because 1 unit of 10 can pretty reliably kill a lot of the chaff in the game, but they're not a build-around centerpiece unit.
Which is totally fine, because they're not supposed to be, right? Like, that's not really what they are in the lore, so I'm totally fine with that. This change is 100% justified in my opinion.
And then I don't know the exact amounts on all of these. I think they're in the like 10 to 15 point range, but generally their good stuff units went up. Raptors, Legionnaires, the Vindicator, the Predators, the Venom Crawler, the Havocs, because the Havocs were absolutely tearing the game up, as everybody knows.
Havoc honestly should be at 200 points for 5.
Somebody was really scared of like Havocs with chain cannons getting an extra AP, and they said no thank you.
What AP won on objectives? objectives? No way, not acceptable. Get them out of here. Raptors also the same, going up. Kind of why? I don't get it. Raptors were not very good. Accursed Cultist going up. Why?
The cultist mob went like 7-1 or something.
I don't understand how. I mean, unless people just really weren't ready for it, because it's a lot of bodies to chew through, right? Vindicator 185. I want to say it's fair because I look at it on paper, but like you roll that one on number of shots, and even though it's 4, it still is kind of still not that great.
For me, I played against them the week or two ago, and I did not realize they were only D6 damage. That thing needs to be D6 plus 1.
Yeah, D6 plus 1 or just 2D3 just to kind of like...
flatten the curve.
Yeah, just like make it so it's like... Because there was one time where I shot Canis Rex with a Vindicator, and I did like 34 points of damage to it. And then I've shot Space Marine squads, and I've killed like 3 guys. It's so swingy at D6 damage. Like when you roll that 1 or 2 on damage, you just are sad, especially if they have a feel no pain.
Yeah, D6 shot, D6 damage. You go anywhere from 0 damage to 36 damage.
Yeah, it's a big change. I wish there was a little bit of green or blue, whatever the hell color that is.
Yeah, they definitely could have gone with some drops.
The Demon Princes could have went down for sure. Almost every Demon Prince in the game can go down.
Demon Princes, like the Gribbly, like the Traitor Guardsmen and things like that.
Yeah, all the specialty cult units probably are pretty much too expensive. The Traitor Enforcer is 65 points. It's criminal. You'll never take it. Traitor Guardsman could be 60 points, and no one's going to be upset. The Cultist Firebrand could be 30. No, I'm going to stop this. 45 points is probably fair, just because like if he's 35 points, everyone's going to take like 2 of them and just put them in each of their corners, and then it just gets annoying. So I'll accept that at 45. Felgor Beastmen are not 85 points. Like you've got to be kidding me. But these aren't real models, so it's fine. Like, they're kill teams. It's okay that they're not relevant in the game. I think I am going to get some Felgor Beastmen and use them as Jackals just because they're really cool models. But
I mean, Vastra didn't get a points increase, so that's good, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Also, Index Emperor's Children.
Yeah.
There it is. Lucius the Eternal, 95 points. Give your Legionaries or Noise Marines fights first. Yeah, I don't think CSM is in a bad spot here, but I don't think I don't think this is their format where they're going to be in the S tier armies. But they already had one of those this edition, so that's fine. They can have another format off. They're definitely playable right now. They're just not super jacked.
So do we want to talk about the next Chaos faction, Chaos Demons, who are in the complete opposite land of Chaos Space Marines? They got a buff to their datasheets and points drops. So previously, Be'lakor had a really nifty ability, and every army took Be'lakor because he had this ability, where the area within 6 inches of Be'lakor counted as being in the shadows of chaos. And what this got for them was it gave them +1 to their leadership, and they healed when they took battle shock tests. It got them the ability to deep strike within 6 inches instead of 9 inches in the whatever detachment is, the only one that can take the index detachment. And all of their enhancements get better if they're within the shadows of chaos. And this 6-inch aura of chaos is now on every greater demon. And this is an enormous buff to the army. Like the Great Unclean One will now always have a 4-up Feel No Pain. There's no way to take that away from him. Bloodthirsters and Shalaxi and Scarbrand are all getting the aura to bring in their friends for 6-inch deep strikes and charges. Just makes them generally harder to kill, and throwing random battle shocks on them like some detachments do is now a lot worse.
Yeah, ultimately, this is a very fundamental way that Demons changes the way Demons play, and it means that you don't have to run Be'lakor. You still, like, the aura of no shoot is still really good. Like, let's not be ridiculous and say that it's not still worth considering taking him, but you don't have to take him to have your army function, which is great. I would have liked to see points drops on the little guys a little bit more.
Yeah, points drops were generally the big models. Be'lakor, Bloodthirster, Demon Princes, Soul Grinders, Skull Cannon. Some of the little guys went down, like Fiends at 105 for 3 is really good.
Yeah, well, that's because they move like 14 or something crazy, don't they? Like, that's actually a very good unit. A 3-man Nurgling is still 40 points. I don't 100% understand that because of the Pariah Nexus rule changes where they're not very useful, but maybe they're not taking Pariah Nexus into account. They're just taking like away what the model can do in like Leviathan or a standard core no mission pack game.
Yeah, also I think they're just trying to not have any units be less than 40 points. That's been a general trend I've been seeing. Crute Hounds went up to 40, Crusaders and Death Cults both went up and are gone now. Even the characters that were below 40 are generally coming up to that price point. It just seems to be what they're pricing a unit as nowadays.
Just existing is worth that. That's fair. I can see that being the justification. GW had the right idea with the Chaos Demons Index because they dropped the price of Demon Princes. See, they listened. They just got to drop them for World Eaters and CSM, and then we're good.
I don't know if we'll call that good, but okay.
Well, they have to drop a lot.
Yes.
I don't think that a Demon Prince is worth 200 points in World Eaters. I know a lot of people online will disagree with me, so get in the comments. Go ahead and come at me. But I am excited to see more demons on the table. A lot of people who play demons have beautifully painted armies too, because the armies are very, I don't want to say forgiving, that's not the right word, but very interesting to paint. And there's a lot of great conversions you can do. So I love seeing demons on the table. I know Will has a demons army that maybe he'll play now, but we'll see. I still don't think soul grinders are worth it because they're huge and impossible to move.
Okay, but now the big demons can bring the soul grinders in. Unless it physically doesn't fit in that 6-inch aura. I'm not sure how big they are.
They're like on a 180 millimeter base or something like that. It's like ridiculous.
Okay, that's bigger than 6 inches, yeah.
Yeah, so they can't. I mean, they can deep strike 9 inches away and then shoot, and then that's just where they live. If they were super heavy walkers, they could go through walls.
I think super heavy walker is only in knights. It does that.
Yeah, it's in the knights detachment rule changes, but it's just funny to think about.
Yeah, overall, I think demons are going to be looking good. Demons players are eating well right now.
Yes, I think demons are in a good spot, and I think that they are definitely will have some play. So I'm excited to see what demons players can do.
Now, the next army that's probably going to have some more play and not a 44% win rate are Dark Angels.
A Dark Angels army no longer means you're taking Azrael, a Dark Shroud, and 2 Storm Ravens.
What? That was my favorite Dark Angels army.
Yeah, it's super interactive and great, right? So the index detachment for Dark Angels, even though they don't have it's the Grim Resolve one, is they just can pick a unit to give +1 OC to. That's that's pretty strong, right? Like, that's a good just base rule. It's a good quality of life change, because having all your rules only work if you're battle shocked means you basically don't have rules most of the time unless things are going poorly for you. And then the vowed target detachment rule gives you basically 2 stances you can put.
You can pick an objective you control and it becomes vowed, or you can pick any number of objectives you don't control and they all become vowed.
Okay, so you get to choose whether or not you want to defend one or you want to push out to the center, and it's definitely nice to have like an option there. I think that is, it's a good change, because I think that the inner circle was kind of meh before. It's still kind of meh now, but now it's at least a little more interesting, and they get +1 to wound on all their vows. So when you're taking the new Deathwing Knights with their AP2 maces,
yeah, anti-monster 4+ and anti-vehicle 4+.
So the worst thing about the Deathwing Knight changes is now anyone who put swords on their guys.
Yeah.
Now you're like, well, you get +1 attack for,
and you don't get anti-4 up.
And you don't get anti-4 up of anything. You actually need that extra attack to hit. I think Deathwing Knights are back on the menu. They are back to their index cost. There's a 235 for 5, so that would be 470 for 10, even though you can only take them in 5s.
The Dark Shroud also took a point site. What are the 15 points?
And gods be damned, it deserved it. Like, get out of my life forever. It should have had a rules change where its aura doesn't apply to vehicles also, but that's fine. At least they're doing something to address the nonsense that is that detachment.
I think the Storm Raven also took a 25-point hike.
Oh, you know what? I did not see that the Inner Circle Companions got buffed too.
Yeah.
I am actually hype about that. Their AP2, they listened to the internet, guys. GW heard the internet complaining about this AP1 nonsense, and they fixed it.
Am I saying this right? The strike is 4 attacks, and the sweep went up to 5? Was the sweep not 5 before?
It was 4 and 4 before.
The sweep was the same as the strike. Wahoo.
Yeah, it literally just gained an extra attack, but a +1 to AP. Dark Angels got a pretty good buff here, and I'm here for it. I like these changes. I do miss my D3 or my damage 3 maces, but like anti-monster, anti-vehicle 4+ is really good.
And there are changes in a way to make you play more of a Dark Angels army.
Yes, you want to play infantry-based guys who are tough and hitty where they need to be hitty. I don't think the army should be indexed Azrael plus Dark Shroud. That's not fun. That's not good. It's not fun to play against. And Storm Ravens, I'm not really a fan of them being in the game in general because, like all flyers, I don't like them being in the game.
Death Guard, they got one real rules change in that the biology professor can no longer grenade twice. If something else is already grenaded, they just get grenade for free. And they got some point changes. The biology professor went up, the Foul Blight Spawn went up. Blight Lord Terminators went down, they're still probably worse than Death Shroud. The Myphitic Blight Hauler went down, the Blight Bringer and the Plague Surgeon. Generally, they didn't really change that much. Maybe you need to drop an enhancement, or maybe you get an extra like 5 or 10 points, but Death Guard largely the same. They're just getting the same general overall rules and environment changes that everybody else is getting.
Death Guard have it good because their battle line troops are good,
Yes.
but not being able to pop off and do 6 mortals to someone by throwing 2 grenades is going to be a little bit unfortunate. And obviously they raised the price on the only 2 characters that are relevant to the army.
The Plague Burst Crawler Castle did get hit because they no longer hit on 3s with Mortarion or 2s with support. So
Yes, I would have liked to see the Plague Burst Crawlers go down a little bit. 180 is not too bad though, because it's still hitting on 4s is not that big a deal when you have lethal hits too. Like,
and they have good direct fire weapons as well. Like, you shouldn't be afraid to drive them around and scrap.
yeah, like they're not weak. They're 2 up, 5 ups, T 10, 12 wounds. Like they still, like, it's not like they're not like whirlwinds, right, where they're gonna die as soon as you pop them out. I don't think that, like, I think the Plague Burst Squall can still think. I think Mortarion is basically never gonna be taken again. I was not a fan of Mortarion before though, so people might still think I'm wrong, but I don't know. Mythic Blight Crawlers, I love the fact they dropped points in them. I wish they would have dropped them to like 75 points because that's probably what they're worth. They're just not it. That being said, I'm gonna run a bunch in a game soon because I have like 5 of them.
You actually gonna play Death Guard finally?
Might as well. I just spent a bunch of money on it.
So let me know how your wife's army does.
Stinky.
Death Watch, they actually got recognition from GW. It wasn't enough of anything to do anything. They got like 10 points taken away on Death Watch veterans, Artemis, and the Watchmaster. But yeah, Death Watch is one of the worst armies in the game right now. They lock you out of taking a good unit in scouts, and they don't give you really anything in return. The Black Spear Task Force is pretty awful ever since they changed all the ammunition stratagems to only work for bolt weapons. It's just, there's no real draw to them. The kill teams are all a little bit overcosted. Deathwatch veterans at 100 per 5 are okay, but they're not world-bringing. Generally, Deathwatch is at best a side grade instead of an upgrade, and you want your special chapter to be an upgrade. So Deathwatch has been languishing as a bottom 3 army, and they got some changes that aren't really going to affect that, I think.
Rumor also is that Deathwatch is going to be folded into Agents of the Imperium.
Honestly, that'll probably be good for them, to be honest. Like, because as of right now, like, I don't think the lore with Deathwatch makes sense for you to have like custom Deathwatch named characters, right? Like, it isn't Deathwatch like a whole, like, you're in there for a little bit and then you go out, and like, or if you're in it forever, you're not like a famous guy. So being part of Agents makes sense. That's what it used to be. It used to be all of the like the Ordo Malleus, the Ordo Xenos, and the Ordo Hereticus was just it was the 3 of them. It was the Grey Knights, Deathwatch, and the Sisters were all in one. Witch Hunters, Demon Hunters, and Alien Hunters. I don't see what they really do with them. They have to do something with them because right now they kind of just are. I don't even think in the best case they're a side grade. I think they're exclusively a downgrade. Like, you're locking yourself out of taking like Marneus Calgar or Shrike or one of the other really good named characters.
Oh, they're a downgrade from other chapters. I meant they're a side grade to like vanilla Space Marines.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Like, if you take Space Marines with no chapter, it's sort of equivalent to taking Deathwatch.
Yeah, if you were playing Carcharodons, you can just say they're Deathwatch. It's the same thing. You don't, because you're not allowed to run Tiberius anymore. Grey Knights got a little bit of a nerf, but not really. It's just mostly you can't Vortex of Doom Lone Ops anymore.
So Grey Knights and Thousand Suns with the Vortex of Doom and Doom Bolt, it can no longer target Lone Ops. Grey Knights points up on the Grey Knights build, so the Dread Knights went up, the Lane Raider Redeemer went up, Castellan Crow went up, which is okay. And the Storm Raven went up for Grey Knights because it got hit from the vanilla Space Marines change.
Yeah, they're just like across the board, Storm Raven up, Lane Raider Redeemer up.
Which is completely fair.
Like I said, Redeemers suck.
Yeah, Redeemers are... They're great when you're using them, I'll tell you that right now. But when you're going up, when you're looking at one and you're like, I have to charge this thing and it's gonna light me on fire, you get a little sad.
Imperial Knights, they got, like I said, the super heavy walker change. They get the general like Titanic changes that have been made to buff them. Some of the big knights went down, the Knight Paladin, the Atropos, which I think is pretty sweetly priced at 425. The Knight Lancer went down, but again, its free tank shock is now a lot worse. And the Styx went down for whoever cares.
Yeah, the Atropos was really good. Wasn't that the one that did really well at the Richmond Open?
I'm not sure. I just know it's one of the better shooty ones.
It's the one with the Singularity Cannon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's really good. That's priced to move at 425 for sure. Votan didn't have any
Literally
rules.
0 points changes.
Yeah, they are the same. I still don't know. They still doing decent.
They have one change in that they have Jaegers now, which are an infiltrating unit, and they cost 80 points, which is absurd because their biggest weakness was their Scout 9 vehicles getting infiltrating blocked. And now they have like a generically good, cheap skirmishy unit that infiltrates and is 80 points. That's 20 points less than Hearthkin Warriors.
I want to start painting my Votan, but I have so much like real stuff to paint, and like they're so far on my list to play. Like I don't know what's the win rate on Votan right now.
It's like just south of 50, I'm pretty sure.
That's roughly where I think they are as an army. I don't think that they are busted by any stretch of the imagination. I think they are pretty fair. I would have liked to see some points drop on the land fort just because I like land forts.
Necrons, they got 3 notable changes. So the Race went up in points, the Doomstalkers went up in points. These 2 units were pretty staples of the army. And the Cosmic Precision strat for 3-inch Deep Strike can no longer affect monsters, which should be read as Catan.
Yes, fuck race, fuck Satan. Sorry, I hate race. I hate race so much.
These are the changes that should have been. Honestly, even at 250 for 6, like I still think 12 raids is pretty decent.
Yeah, if you took your Canoptic Court list, that biggest skew had like 3 Doomstalkers, 18 race, and you got 60 points on that list, like, I guess 80 points, like, you can drop a Canoptic Doomstalker and your list is still the same.
Yeah, I think that is still a fairly good army, and I think that people will be upset to play against it.
Speaking of armies that aren't good anymore, though, let's talk about orcs.
Well, orcs suck, and I hate orcs, so
I agree.
I think they were always bad.
We can all rejoice in the failure of orcs now.
Pretty sure that's what Will always says, actually. And if I'm wrong, he can pipe up now and defend himself.
Nobody hates orcs more than orc players. I will. They hit orcs pretty hard.
Yeah, Green Tide was emerging as the best build. It was just ahead of Bully Boys. I think it won more events and might have had, or won less events, but had a better win rate, something along those lines. And it got hit with a few collection of nerfs.
Yeah, I think that Green Tide was always really the secret sauce. I think it was always the best detachment, but like not everyone has 120 boys battle ready.
And I think GW didn't really intend for it to be a competitive choice. I think they introduced it as just like a detachment for the people who wanted to throw 120 boys on the field, and then they realized that they made that optimal, and that's not maybe what they were going for.
Yeah, if you ever crank like the math together on like how durable 20 boys was with a Feel No Pain, it's heinous. Like, I'm pretty sure that if I sent 6 Exalted 8-bound into them with +1 to wound and rerolling 1s, the unit still stands a decent chance of surviving, and nothing in the game should survive that. Like, that is literally one of the hardest hitting combinations in the game. And the Green Tide are like, well, I rolled a bunch of 5s, and I'm fine.
Yeah, so boys only get a 6-up invuln, and they get a 5-up invuln if they have 10 or more boys. It used to just be 5-up all the time, and they no longer reroll 1s to save, which is another pretty big hit. 2 of the stratagems also got changed. There was one where I believe it was like +1 to your charge for every battle round.
Yeah.
And now it's +1 to your charge, and if you're 10 or more models, you can reroll the charge, which is significantly worse because now you're not getting a 5-inch charge with a weird boy unit or something like that.
Yeah, still is a good stratagem, and like I feel as though people complaining about this one are just like they don't understand how heinous that old stratagem was.
It was pretty gross.
Getting a +4 or 5 to your charge on the last turn of the game to steal a crucial objective is kind of obnoxious.
That's orcs.
Go get him as a stratagem. I don't think this one needed a nerf, but it did. So I think that
But it got it.
But it got it. It's I still think it's a good stratagem. I still think it's something that you're always gonna assume they're gonna roll the 6 if you can play around it anyway. So I don't think it really matters.
So it used to be you would roll a d6 for a Blood Surge move, or it was flat 6 if you had 10 or more models. Now you get to reroll the d6 if you have 10 or more models.
Yeah. Probably would have been more fitting if it was D3 plus 3, and if you have 10 or more models instead of re-rolling. But like I said, I think that most good players are always going to be 7.1 away when they shoot you, if they have to be that close at all. So it kind of doesn't matter. None of this matters. We're all just playing with plastic guys.
So Green Tide got hit with, those 3 changes directly to their rules. Also, they indirectly got hit from Meganobs because Meganobs had that enhancement where they could get reroll ones to save because they counted as being led. But now that attachment doesn't do that, so the Meganobs don't do that. They also got hit on some of their key units, with the Weird Boy and the Pain Boy specifically going up in points.
And not that it was probably a real concern anyway, but the Cole the Horde secondary, they clarified it that if you take a unit below starting strength, it still counts as a 20-man unit.
And last, Meganobs got double tapped here. Their 4-up Feel No Pain during the law changed to a 5-up Feel No Pain during the law, which is much more reasonable in my opinion. And they also took a points hike. So they went from 30 points a model to 40 points a model.
That is probably a little too far. I think 35 points a model probably would be pretty fair for them. If they wanted to keep the 4-up Feel No Pain, then I think that 40 points a model actually would be a steal for them still. I think they're still just that durable. But yeah, 40 points a model is a lot.
I would have liked to see 35 as well. Honestly, 30 still might have been okay, just because outside of Bully Boys, they're not really a real unit.
Yeah, I think that they are kind of one of those, in those kind of those weird spaces where like you want 33 points a model or something like that, but you don't have enough models in the unit to actually have a round number be that way. So you kind of just get screwed. But yeah, 35 seems more fair and in Bully Boys, and then 30 points in every other detachment. Obviously, we can't differentiate that way, but I still think Orcs got play. Personally, I just think that they're not nearly as good as they were before.
Yeah, Green Tide is not really consideration anymore. And then outside of Green Tide, I mean, Snickrot took a points hike and the Meganobs got worse. But there are ways to build orcs that don't involve Meganob Central. So I think outside of that Green Tide build, your orcs are largely unchanged except for your Meganobs.
Yeah, I mean, Nob still hit insanely hard. And I still think Snickrot is worth it at, what is he, 95 now? I still think his ability is really good. I know Will disagrees with me, but like I don't think 10 points was the deal breaker for him.
I think overall the Codex is still really good because they have a lot of play. And I mean, for most part, I mean, I think the army's still going to place pretty decently in the upper 50% bracket.
I think it's going to be where it's been pretty much the entire time. It's in that upper B, low A index. I don't think that it is dead like a lot of orc players seem to be thinking. But I get it. I do get it. Your toy got taken away, and that really sucks. I did the same thing when they hit Dark Angels. I was like, hey man, this Codex sucks. But I was on my way out, so I wasn't ride or die with Dark Angels too. So I understand why you'd be upset, but Orcs still got to play. You can't just walk 18 guys with plate metal strapped to them up the board and say you can't kill me.
So I don't play enough Space Marines. Who wants to talk about Space Marines?
So they got changes to a few of their detachments, and they also got some mostly points nerfs. We can go over the points nerfs real quick. The Gladiators, specifically the Reaper and the Valiant, both went up. Interesting, they decided not to touch the Lancer with that, but okay. The Land Raider Redeemer went up across the board, like we said. The Land Raider Crusader went down. It was generally the worst one, so maybe you'll see one you probably still won't.
It's almost there. It doesn't have any real guns, which is really unfortunate.
It's at that weird point where, especially with the repulsor change, a repulsor can now hold 14, like we said, and went down and is 180 points. The repulsor is competing as like that sort of just transporting transport, and the Crusader now really needs guns to put it over the line, and it just doesn't have them, but...
Because the Repulsor has a few mediocre guns, whereas the Crusader has no guns. But the Repulsor has the ability to get back in. So you can get back in instead of charging out of it. But Terminators kind of aren't very good right now, so...
Aggressors like getting out and shooting and then getting back in. It's kind of neat.
It's very neat. It's actually, I would say, obnoxious, not neat. But
the Storm Raven went up across the board, and then that's really it. I would have liked to see some more drops, especially with how wide of a range they have. There are models that you have not ever seen.
Vulcan could come down. I understand why they didn't drop the Whirlwind right now. All the Storm Speeders probably could be knocked down a couple points. Tactical squads could come down, although I know why they didn't drop them, because they just want to soft erase them from the game. Chaplains can come, all these units that just are never seen come down, and it just it's fine.
I'd like to see drop pods.
Drop pods are always really cool. There's, 7 of them on the shelf, the
There's
used shelf that
5
are
last
local.
that I checked. Yeah.
It's 5, so I don't know. They did drop the point on the 2 Iron Storm enhancements, but that's because they made them so they were not auras anymore. They were point and click enhancements. So you say, that guy's better, that guy's better.
We can go to the detachment changes. So for Iron Storm, the aura of lethal hits is now pick a guy and he gets lethal hits, and the aura of advanced fallback and shoot is now pick a guy to advance fallback and shoot. And to compensate for that, they went down in points, which is fair. And auras were cancer, and I'm glad that they're making auras less.
Yeah, honestly, they slammed Iron Storm really hard. Mercy and his weakness is also up to 2 CP. Crit 5s is absolutely worth being 2 CP. I would have liked to see them buff the, what's it called? The Firestorm? No.
The Firestorm Assault
The
Force?
Imperial Fist ones.
Oh.
Honestly, the Anvil Siege Force.
Anvil Siege Force, yeah.
It's like, I don't know what it's called, but I would have liked to see them buff that because, like, in a similar way that they did with the AdMech stuff. Hopefully they will next time around, because, like, I don't think anyone's ever played that in a meaningful sense. First Company is a meme detachment, so they can kind of stay where it's at.
The one way you could play it was super indirect heavy, because you could give all your indirect heavy or +1 to wound if it already had heavy, and now indirect is worse. So it's not the detachment got nerfed.
Yeah, it's not gonna happen for you. So
here's the take I've heard online. Actually, I'm curious y'all's opinion here. So currently, Space Marines are like a 48 to 46% one. 48 to 46, I think was the total number for the run rate. But the take was, so you have a lot of people that have Space Marines out there because it's the poster boy army. Everybody gets Space Marines. All the starter boxes come with Space Marines.
they're easy to collect.
Yeah. So Space Marines having a low win rate is more my type of player, the dad player that wants to play in a tournament every now and again and does really poorly versus what their actual win rate should be. So I'm saying the mediocre players, and I'm calling myself a very mediocre player in this, brings the win rate down for Space Marines as a whole, when their win rate should definitely be upper in the 50%. Thoughts?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think Space Marines are actually quite good. I think that they are definitely in the top 10 of armies, in my opinion. I just think that there are a couple very specific ways that you have to play them, and you can't play the stuff that maybe is the most fun. Like, you're never going to take a Predator in regular Space Marines when you could take things like a Lancer or another type, one of the Gladiator chassis. The Primarchs are really cool to put on the table, but they're just not super great. They're not points efficient. You want to take things like, you want to take 3 Scout Squads to score you points. You want to take 8, like 12 Inceptors to come down to drop 20 inches away and shoot your opponent. It's not stuff that you comes in all those starter boxes and you collect. So it's kind of just a different way to play than what people naturally collect, naturally gravitate towards. I kind of touched on it before. Terminators are not good. Actually, I don't think anything in the Leviathan box is good, except for the Apothecary Biologus.
It's an issue, I think, of range. There's so many models. There's 7 detachments in the codex. There's also 5 divergent chapters that you can use, and at least 5 divergent detachments as well. There's 700 ways to make them bad, and there's 5 or 6 ways to make them good. And so across the whole of the game, you get a lot of players who build them poorly. And there are plenty of ways, there's a bunch of different ways to make Space Marines good. They're not locked into 1 or 2 builds. But there's just so many ways to make them bad that it ends up happening.
I absolutely do not think that Space Marines are bad. I don't think they are crying out for help, even if they are sub 40. And the fact that even despite their playing that uphill battle because it's the new guy army, them being at 48% is a testament to the fact that they're still a good army. Speaking of good armies,
we've got Space Wolves up next.
Space Wolves caught that buff, that good buff.
They got a buff and a nerf. So this Champions of Rust attachment was previously a joke, and it's still not the best, but they did get a buff. So at the start of the battle, you can pick one of your sagas, and it counts as completed. You cannot pick Saga of the Majesty for +1 OC, which I am glad for, because then all of your Wolfen and stuff would automatically be OC1, and that would be kind of heinous. But you can generally give all your units sustained or 6-up Feel No Pain just to start the battle, which is great. People love that.
Or lethals if you're playing against something like Knights, I guess.
Yeah. In exchange for this, the Stormlance heavy build took some points hits. Thunderwolf Cav went up from 90 to 100 per 3, so they went up 3 points a model. And Wolfen went up, I think, 10 points a model from 80 to 90 per 5. I do still think Stormlance is the way to go. I think giving up advance and fallback and charge, as well as the 2 really good strats for 1 CP -1 to hit and wound, and then the 2 CP 9-inch advance when you can advance and charge, and the enhancement for the turn 1 come out of reserves. I think all of that is still better than Champions of Russ. But if you're not playing the Thunderwolf heavy, Wolf Jail build, and you're going for a different storm, even if you are playing that, you can take Champions of Russ and legitimately feel quite good about it. I think that change was what they needed. They needed something to give the unit the push over the starting line so that they can start finishing their sagas instead of struggling to complete any of them because they didn't have a detachment rule.
I mean, Space Wolves are already like the top army as far as the last couple of weeks go, but I still think Space Wolves are going to be up there, especially with, like we mentioned, the Wolf Cav going up in points. Hopefully won't be stuck in Wolf Gel all the time, but I do think their own detachment's pretty solid now.
I would have liked to see them go up from the 3 to like 5 points a model. I would have liked to see at least like 205 or 210 per 6.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that 3.8 points a model, whatever it is not nearly enough for the Thunderwolf Cavs. I think that they are very good. And I think that we'll kind of, if we have time to talk about it later, we're running out of time actually. I think that looking at some of the deployments on the Pariah Nexus battlefield, I think that they're gonna eat pretty well because some of those are very melee friendly.
Tau got no army or like sort of rules changes. They got some nice quality of life point changes. All the crisis suits and crisis commanders went down. The broadsides went down 20. They went up 20 in the codex, and then they quickly realized that was not the right direction and brought them back down those 20. And the strike teams continued to go down another 5 points because they don't do anything at all. And in exchange for all this, the Hammerhead went up 15. The Hammerhead was previously, at least for the last month, the most points efficient anti-tank in the army. So it catches a small nerf there. Generally, I'm okay with all of this. I'll have to redesign my list a little bit. It makes retaliation a little bit more interesting with all the crisis suits going down. We'll just see how it shakes out.
Breachers are still 10 points a model, huh?
Yeah.
Didn't do anything about that, huh?
The army has to do something.
Do they, though? I mean, it's a fake army.
They'll be better once they get their codex.
Yeah. When they get a codex, it'll be fine.
Thousand Suns actually caught quite a comprehensive change here. There hadn't been a lot of noise about them. They were performing pretty well, right? But nobody was really clamoring for any sort of huge rework, but they ended up getting one. So they got a change to some of their rituals, and a change to the army rule. You cannot select a Psyker twice for a ritual, which was a change that many people didn't even know. Like, they thought that restriction was already built in because it was in 9th. It's now back in 10th. And then 3 of their rituals got nerfed. So Twist of Fate, which was removing an armor save, now just increases your AP by 2. And it also is only in shooting. You can't use that in melee. So those Land Raiders and other general 2-up armor no invulns are not going to get killed by flamers anymore. And it takes a little bit away from the Terminators, who could previously pretend to do work in melee, and they legitimately could do some work in melee if you took away armor saves and put 10 Terminators in. Doombolt, like we talked about with the Grey Knights Vortex of Doom, can no longer target enemy units if they have Lone Up outside of 12. And Temporal Surge, which is Move Again, can no longer be used to triple move a unit if you have, Lord of Forbidden Lore, to do a ritual twice. So, just some nerfs sort of across the board.
In exchange, they got points drops on everything.
Yes.
The Mulith Vortex Beast is down to 150.
Can I just say, why is that unit continuing to go down? That is a crazy points efficient unit right there.
Yeah, that thing has been stupid the entire edition. It got up to 175 at its highest?
It's one of their only things that they can actually put on an objective, and it just keeps going down.
Thousand Suns are very much like, I'm going to point at something in your army and it's dead and you can't do anything about it. But yeah, they're just Marines in power armor, right? But the Vortex Beast is a different breed. He is tough as nails.
They also do get hit a little bit with the indirect changes. You will no longer have Magnus hitting you from 36 inches on 2s with +1 to wound.
Oh, they do gain the indirect fire ability. I thought it was like the Fire Prism where they just use line of sight.
So you need to have a spotter, and the spotter gives all psychic weapons the indirect fire ability.
Okay, yeah, that's great then. I love that for me.
No more calling down a nuke bomb with Magnus in your deployment zone. You can still do it, he'll just hit on 4s instead of 2s.
Yeah, so you use the Cabal to reroll, and you probably do some amount of damage, but it's not worth you exchanging a Disc Sorcerer to do it anymore.
They also had I think it was a Cabal ritual for a free stratagem, and you would use that on reroll hits and wounds for psychic weapons. and now that will cost you 1 CP instead of being free. So as a battle tactic that costs 2 CP, you can make it free. Now you just make it 1. So the whole indirect package kind of got nerfed, which is good because indirect is bad.
Yes, not good for the game. So I like it.
So, Alex, are you ready?
Is it finally time? Have I been patient enough? So Tyranids,
We'll talk about this next episode, I think.
I think we should, honestly.
Good night,
Yeah, we hit
everybody.
the 2-hour mark. Sorry, guys, I gotta go to bed. I'm kind of sleepy.
Yeah.
We have time to talk about all these World Eater changes.
Yeah.
All right, go for it, Alex.
So Tyranids got some really fun, cool changes, in my opinion. So just starting like right at the top, changes to the army rules. We still get the 3d6 battle shock test, but now we also, for every unit that is in synapse range, you get +1 to the strength characteristics of your melee attacks. So that is huge. That puts a lot of really cool models over some neat breakpoints. That puts Swarmlord up to strength 10 with twin linked. That means Gene Stealers with a Broodlord on them can be strength 5 with devastating wounds. That means that all sorts of stuff can hit really cool points, like Carnifex with Crushing Talons are now strength 13. So a lot of stuff breaks some really cool breakpoints, do some really cool stuff. Shadow in the Warp now means that if an enemy unit is within 6 inches of a Synapse unit, they are getting -1 to their battle test, so just continuing that stacking negative battle shock modifiers. Crusher Stampede got a very minor buff. I don't think it's going to be enough to change them, but now if a Tyranid monster in Crusher Stampede is at its starting strength, it gets +2 to its OC. Also, for the Untrammeled Ferocity, it gets a little bit of a change. It's still, I don't think it's enough to make Crusher Stampede better. Basically, they just also get to, ignore the terrain and stuff similar to what we talked about earlier. Datasheet changes. The Hive Tyrant getting lethal hits added to his aura is a huge change. I think that might actually be enough to make it to where Onslaught Swarms still might be kind of okay, because you can now take just an ungodly swarm of Termagants with the Spine Fists and give them lethal hits that they can now shoot in melee. So that is one kind of weird niche way to still keep them kind of relevant. I think Onslaught Swarm will still be okay, but I think we're going to see a lot more Invasion Fleet and Vanguard Onslaught lists. Neurolictor got Synapse. Broodlord and Parasite of Mortrex got the Shadow in the Warp and Synapse, so both of those are really good. Parasite of Mortrex I still don't think is going to get a lot of play, especially with the OC1 changes. Moloch, Raveners, and Trigons getting Vanguard Invader is really cool because now you can do some really fun shenanigans with our snake bugs. So like Molochs, for example, you can deep strike them, and anytime that you do, any model within 12 units of them, you roll a d6, and you can force them to take mortals or to take battle shock tests. And using the Seated Brood stratagem, you can deep strike 2 Molochs now on turn 1. So that is a very fun way to kind of force some early damage and pop a big giant snake that they have to deal with right in front of them. 2 other changes to our big ranged bugs. Exocrines got an extra pip of strength, so now sitting at strength 9. I think that's really good. That is going to help them a lot with popping rhinos. Tyrannifexes have gone from 2d6 damage to a d6 plus 6, so that is absolutely huge. Minimum damage has gone up by 6, average damage has gone up by like 3 or so. So very big change there. Now, my favorite change that I think so far is the change to Neurotyrants. So you can now attach a Neurotyrant to a unit of Zoanthropes. So you can take 6 Zoanthropes for 200 points, take a Neurotyrant for 105, and when you add them together, you now have a unit that is either doing 6 las cannons hitting on 2s, that can, if they're targeting a battle shocked unit, add 1 to their wound roll, and you also get a 2d6 strength 5 AP1 2 damage flamer on the Neurotyrant. And you can overwatch with them and get 6 d3 shots with blast. So on top of the flamers. The Neurotyrant was already one of our really good Overwatch opportunities. Attaching to Zoanthropes is going to be a huge game changer for him. I really think that's going to make 6 Zoanthropes and a Neurotyrant pretty much an auto-include, just because that's such a reliable amount of damage.
So if you're going to play, what list and detachment would you be playing then?
I don't know which one I would want to play the most. I really like Vanguard Invader now that the big snakes are cool. Being able to deep strike those a turn early. So on turn 1, you can do a regular deep strike. Turn 2, using the Seated Broods, you could pop them up on the opponent's board edge. So that could be very fun, good shenanigans. I think that the big snakes are definitely viable units now that they have a bit more stratagem support, because they just get so many attacks on. Like, let me look it up. The Moloch gets like 16 attacks, for instance, which is just a really fun amount to pop up in the middle of the board and do some stuff. Trigons have the ability to deep strike right next to you, like 3 inches away, but they can't charge that turn. But even a Trigon gets 12 attacks hitting on 3s at strength 9. If they're in Synapse now, they'll be at strength 10. So, very good stuff there. I think my best bet for the most competitive army, though, is still probably going to be Invasion Fleet, just because of the added flexibility that gets you with being able to choose sustained hits or lethal hits and stuff like that, or precision. So I think that the lethal hits or sustained hits are going to be really strong. It's just going to be another thing that plays really, really well with the Neurotyrant and Zoanthropes that are just going to be very, very consistent sources of damage now. I'm not sure where Unending Swarm will be. I think it's going to go a bit down, but it also did get some buffs because the Turbogon went down a bit in price. And then you could, still take a Neurotyrant in that list with some Zoanthropes to kind of sit in the middle of them to get all of your Gaunts of 6 up in Vuln as well. So I definitely still think it has play. I'm not super confident in giving a number for where it'll be at percentage-wise. But I do think Invasion Fleet and Vanguard Invaders are going to see a big buff in their win percentage for sure.
Can you get a buff to charging the Moloch out of Deep Strike?
I do not believe so.
But it still is a pretty big, tough bug right in front of people.
Yeah, for sure. It is not Synapse, but it has a really big base on it, so it's really easy to get it back into Synapse range. And I mean, a Moloch is still a toughness 10, 3-up save model with 14 wounds. And when it deep strikes, every model within 12 inches of it is taking, on a D6, on a 2 to 4, they take a D3 mortals. On a 5-up, they take a flat 3 mortals, and they take a battle shock test. So popping 2 of those up on turn 1 and forcing a huge chunk of your opponent to take their army to take battle shock tests, I think we'll see some pretty serious play.
I would like to make one correction. When I was talking about the AdMech weapon change, I'm pretty sure I was thinking about the Rupture Cannon, not AdMech. So I'll walk that one back.
The Rupture Cannon is way better now. So I have always liked the terrain effects, but a 2d6 weapon that only gets 2 shots is very swingy. It's going to do nothing or everything. So I think that's definitely going to be really cool seeing it now. There's a little bit more consistency with it, that d6 plus 6 damage.
So overall, what's your grade for the changes here?
I think it's a really good grade. I think that it's going to tone down some of the... Oh, and I forgot to mention, of course, Biovores went down in price. Neurolictors went up slightly in price. Really about the only thing that changes. Ripper Swarms did it up and down at the same time, but not anything real crazy. I think the changes are really good. I think this is going to encourage a much more wide-ranging array of lists to take. I think there's going to be a lot less of, well, I'm just going to take 120 bugs and 60 gargoyles, and you're just going to have to deal with it, kind of a thing. And much to Will's chagrin, there will no longer be shooting spore mines in every single corner of the board and just saying, okay, I'm just going to score points, not really play the game. So I think from a competitive standpoint, we're going to be a much more fun, engaging army to play. And from a fun standpoint, this is miles better than the, I'm just going to show up on the board, I don't care about my attacks, I'm just here to score points. So I think that this is a flavor win and a competitive win for sure.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of positive changes overall, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. A lot of the stuff I've been really upset about with NIDS has gotten fixed with this for sure. So we got just a little bit of a buff to make us better. Synapse is actually a fun rule to use now that isn't just a basic nerf. Definitely all around a fun change.
So last up, World Leaders. Okay, we're done.
They got 5 points on the 8-bound.
They did. And then they got points drops on 8-bound and Exalted 8-bound, which, you want to run a lot of in that army.
Yeah, I would have liked to see points drops on Berserkers.
Yeah, you've also said that for the past 2 months.
I'm going to say it next data sheet too, probably, because they're probably not going to drop them next data sheet either.
I don't see anybody running. Well, I mean, I've seen some lists where people run 20 Jackals and 20 Berserkers and then just a whole bunch of other crap, but I just don't know how good that is.
I don't think Berserkers are good. I don't think they do anything meaningful. I think that it would be nice to have a cheap skirmish unit that can hit a little bit harder than Spawn, but because I don't want to have to, oh hey, my opponent has 10 breachers on an objective. Well, Spawn aren't going to kill those breachers, so I guess I have to send 3 8-bound into them, and I just traded down 100, I just traded 145 points for 100 points, you know what I mean? Like, it's not great for me. Or I guess 140 now, there you go. I would like that personally, but I am just a man sitting in front of a computer telling GW that I love skulls for the Skull Throne.
I am in agreement with you. I do like skulls, and I do like the Skull Throne. But yeah, it would be nice to actually get Berserkers down just a little bit more.
And I said it before, Demon Princes, man.
What, you don't want to pay 200 points for one?
It is not worth 200 points just to give my 8-bound a 4-up save. I can take another unit of them for that.
And you should, because it's better than a Demon Prince.
And you should. I think that my next list is going to have 18 8-bound. It's going to have 12 Exalted and 6 regulars.
I think the list I'm toying with is similar. I also have some Forge Fiends in there.
Yeah, I think we might be having the same list. So my biggest question is, are Spawn going to be OC0 when the Codex comes out? And if so, please don't let that happen. I don't want them to be OC0.
We'll find out about 6 months before the edition ends.
I'm kind of okay with that, actually. The World Leadership Index is very good, so it's not like we're hurting for a Codex, right? I want more units, but I'm not like saddened by the fact that we don't have that many more units. We have kind of enough to do what we need to do. We're not like Votan, where we have 6 guys in a trench coat.
And that one really nice named guy.
Yeah, who does nothing. Somehow makes your army worse when you take him.
I'm okay with the World Leaders. I still have fun playing the army. And yeah, my list I just looked at, it also has 18 8-bound in it.
That's Open Play Podcast suggestion for all you World Leaders players. 18 8-bound.
Just all the 8-bound. Bring them all.
I mean, realistically, we should do 24 because that's a multiple of 8, but
True.
I'd have to probably drop Invocatus to get that to happen, so
that about wraps up the army changes, I think. Do we want to high-level hit the tournament companion they released for Prime Nexus?
Sure. So they added in Tournament Companion Pack, very similar to the Leviathan. It has some sort of generic rules that you have to follow when you're playing the tournament. It adds some recommended missions, and it adds 8 recommended deployment layouts, as opposed to the 4 in Leviathan. Now, some of these rule changes are pretty simple, like you are allowed to stand on the objective token and things like that. But there are some changes specifically to the infamous charge blocking. So currently in 40k, rules as written, if you are more than an inch off of a wall, but there is not space for a charging model to fit through there, they cannot charge you. And so it creates situations where you can extend charges to make people go around buildings instead of hypothetically being in the wall because they're breachable. GW has clarified in their FAQ that this is intended. They do then add a paragraph saying, well, maybe you might want to make your own rules so that it's not this way. So they're sort of having their cake and eating it too. In my opinion, they say, yeah, you are allowed to make charges longer, but also you might not want to. But as it is, they have given us a stance of that charge blocking is okay, so we will probably see more of that going forward. A lot of tournaments up until now have been doing their own sort of modifications where you can pretend to be inside the wall, or engagement range is extended if you are a breachable model and things like that.
And one thing that looking at that page of the FAQ actually reminds me of the Big Guns Never Tire change, the out-of-phase shooting one, where they're locked in combat. They cannot make use of like the Fire Overwatch stratagem anymore.
Yeah, that has been the technical rule, but it was one that I had to explain like during the league for a long time.
Yeah, it's good to have it clarified and in writing.
I also did have to crush a guard player's dreams last week when I told him his tank commander could not fire on death because he was engaged. And that's now clarified as well. Also in the tournament companion, we've got some changes to the missions. So recover assets is not able to be taken as a fixed objective, which was looking to be the strongest fixed objective, so that is a major change. Cull the Horde now looks at the starting points value of a unit instead of the amount of models you put on the table, so you can't do the cheese to get around Cull the Horde by taking 19 of the 20 models and paying for 20. And Assassination now clarifies that when a character model is destroyed, gives you 5 points, not a character unit, which was mostly, I think, for multi-character units like the Demonifuge and Ashtred Thurga in Sisters. All just nice updates to have. Finally, a change for hidden supplies. If there is not a obvious corner to move it to in No Man's Land, you now get to roll off and the winner can pick which objectives to split them in, or which direction to split the objectives in.
Just kind of codifying the rule in general, right? That's fine.
So they have a layout specifically for long ways maps, which are Sweep Engagement and Dawn of War, and that's layout 5. It's also the only layout you can use on Dawn of War recommended. So it's nice that they decided to go that like specific with the way they make their maps. They didn't try to make all of them good at everything. They did go like, these maps are used here and here, and these maps are used here and here.
Yeah, to be fair, I think the Dawn of War map's still kind of ass.
It does look pretty bad.
It's still like, it's pretty wide open in that center that I don't know, but they made an attempt, which I like. Yeah, I agree with you, Preston. Like they did something there. I'm not really sure I agree with what they did. It's better than layout 2 on Hammer and Anvil, right? Like, it's not that bad, but
for the most part, these maps generally look okay. I don't have any big complaints about them. I know layout 7's kind of goofy. Oh yeah, layout 7 is the melee haven.
Yeah, I want to play this layout.
if you let Will get to the tournament first and start setting up terrain,
Will does not set up terrain. That's my job, baby. I'm never picking this one.
He will always default to this one, guaranteed.
So layout 7 and 8 do a very interesting thing where they put those midfield ruins on the board edge, and I just think that's a terrible decision. I don't think ruins should ever touch a board edge. I think you should always be able to go up the outside of the board. I don't think you should ever be forced to go into the middle.
I could see you having the blues up against the board edge, right?
Yeah, because at least you can move over the blues.
Right.
I mean, just play knights. You ignore terrain now, so it's fine.
Okay, but every other vehicle has to stand in the center of the board if they want to go out of their deployment zone.
That sounds like them problem, not me. All my guys are infantry. I just run through walls.
Well, Angron's got to go around. He's got to go in the center.
He can fly. He's fine.
They have one path to the enemy. They're going to get in each other's way.
I mean, Angron flies. He'd lose a move, but he can fly. It's fine. It's fine. Lord of Skulls, though, yeah. No, Lord of Skulls is kind of screwed.
I mean, going straight towards the enemy is kind of what you want to do with World Eaters anyway. So it's like, those aren't the units that you want to be tricksy with. Those are the units like, hey, move forward, deal with me, or you lose this game right now. Yeah, I didn't think about it at first, but when you pointed it out, you're right. It is kind of weird that there are no movement lanes. Honestly, looking at layout 8 and just like the bottom right quadrant and the top left, obviously, it'd be hard to move something through like that little gap between those two ruins over there.
Just take advantage of your new pivot value.
I mean, yeah, you have to, right? Like,
also, like, with the crates in the center, like, you can't even stand in the center with anything big. You can stand directly in the center, but other than that, you have to, like, chill on the outside of the board.
Yeah, it's like Thunderdome, but instead of, it's like the exact opposite, whereas before, like, nothing could really see into the, Thunderdome being terrain layout 1, for those who don't call it that, where nothing could really see in unless you were already on, like, you were on the outskirts of it. Now, like, everything can see in there.
Yeah, and nothing can actually move through it.
Yeah, nothing can move through it, everything can see it, and you're just ready to get, like, explode if you walk into that circle of death.
It's definitely hard to parse how good these layouts are with so many of them and so many ways to combine them. I'll definitely have to see a couple months in, like, which layouts are being used most often and which missions are, and we can give some better feedback then. But for now, it's nice that they're making an effort to sort of go a little bit harder on their mission matrix.
I'm going to step it even farther than that. Thank you, GW, for putting measurements in this tournament pack. Because I hated the first couple weeks where I had to guess.
Okay, but now I actually have to do all these measurements when I'm setting up, and it's going to take longer.
No, you don't, because the on the 4x6 pieces, I just use those to measure the corners. So you if you know where 2 corners are on each big square, then you know exactly where parts need to go. So.
But like, look at those crates.
Those crates are going to be agony. Like, yeah, that's unfortunate. We can't do anything about it. But
before I could just throw them in a vague approximation, and now I have. If they're not measured right, I get yelled at.
Well, Will is still the head TO, so we're still gonna it's still gonna be an approximation.
So I do want to say one thing, kind of in the vein of what you're just talking about, Mason. I would like to thank GW for a change, for actually getting all this information out: the data slate, the points update, the FAQ, and the Pariah Nexus mission tournament companion here prior to everything coming out.
Yeah, I was kind of worried that like RTTs in July weren't going to have this available. So like kudos to them for cranking this out, because the Leviathan mission pack wasn't out for like what, almost a month after the cards were released.
We were flying blind. I remember an RTT where we had Servo Skulls.
Yeah, that was the one that I ran.
Why would you do this?
because we didn't have any rules otherwise, and I hadn't played Servo Skulls before, and I was like, oh, this is really bad. Everyone was right. I was just like, yeah, people are probably just whining on the internet. No, people were 100% correct. No, I think that this will be a good mission pack, though. It's a good shake up for what we were getting, because Leviathan was getting a little stale, right?
Yeah, and we didn't really know what they were going to do either, because it was, 6 months before for every new mission set?
Yes.
In nine, yeah, it was around 6 months.
So it's been a long year. So overall, these are the current point standings. We're looking at stat check, by the way, for folks listening. Who do we think are going to be the big swings? Just as a going out here, what army do we think is going to be the swingest?
Orcs are going to go down. Sisters are going to go down to start. We'll see where they settle. Drukhari, I think, are going to go up.
You think Sisters are going to go down from 52? They're still really good, aren't they?
Yeah, but now you have less units, which makes them less forgiving. Because before, you could sort of get by, okay, just throwing units forward, and if they died, they didn't matter. But now, if you lose units, it impacts your game a lot more.
That's fair. I did forget that the secret was out on Sisters, and more people were picking them up, like people who weren't as... Because for a while, it was just like faction specialists, right? So like it didn't matter if they were less forgiving.
Chaos Demons are definitely going to go north of 50% instead of the current south they're at right now.
Yeah, I think regular Eldar going up too.
I mean, I will say also as another point that looking at the board, having like 21 armies in that sweet spot of plus minus 5% is actually pretty decent.
Oh yeah. Like this is not a bad skew at all. I don't think Space Wolves are going to go down very much. I don't think they got hit very hard at all.
I think the teleporting factions are going to be good because it'll make it easier to do actions now that you can advance an action. So Grey Knights and Hypercrypt, maybe. Hypercrypt kind of got hit, but definitely Grey Knights I think are going to stay strong.
Say this as a meme, but not a meme, but Hypercrypt players just need to not play Satan and figure something else out.
I mean, you could still play one Nightbringer.
Yeah, you just don't need 3 of them.
Yeah, I think Hypercrypt is still strong. Canoptic Horde is still strong. Necrons are still good.
Yeah, I think Orcs will go down. I still think they'll be about a 50% win rate, but I do think they'll drop from their 55 currently. GSC are initially going to go down. I think once people figure out which detachments are best with Gene Stealers, I think that will rise up again, because I think there's a couple of solid detachments in there. Drukhari, I agree, will go up. I think CSM's probably going to still kind of be where it is in that plus minus 2%. Guard, I don't know. Guard, we'll see. With the change to indirect, I think people are going to lose focus on how to play Guard and have to figure out a new play style. But I think Guard will still be that plus or minus 2%.
I think Guard got a buff similar to Dark Angels, where the armies that people were wanting to play are the ones that got buffed. And the indirect castles are getting nerfed, but your mechanized tank infantry are getting buffed.
Dark Angels, I think, are going to go up. I think they'll definitely be out of that lower win rate. Tyranids will go up.
AdMech 100% is going to go up.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I want to see AdMech go up like 9%. I want to see him just at a flat 50 or higher.
I think it's still going to be that 45, 46, but 41, no.
Yeah, I think they'll need a little bit more to figure out the points, right? Like, it was a big change, so it was hard to quantify things. So I think that they'll probably get tweaked a little bit next data sheet. I think that it's probably better to talk about what's going to be outside of the sweet spot in the middle, right?
Deathwatch.
Yeah. Deathwatch is literally on Deathwatch.
I mean, yeah, Deathwatch is going to stay below.
Marines.
I think Space Wolf is going to be above. Drukhari stands a chance about being above 50.
I don't think Drukhari have a lot of great players. I'm going to be really honest. I mean, everybody knows Skari, but outside of that, there's not a lot of people who are taking Drukhari to podium, so they might be held down by their player base. Feel free to message me and tell me that you're actually good with Drukhari and I'm wrong, but...
So, for anyone who wants to fist fight Preston, his address is 123. Drukhari's not represented a lot either, too. So, it's 55 players. Is that what that is?
5 players for Real Space Raiders.
Wait, no one's playing Real Space Raiders that actually wants to But I think elves are pretty good. World Eaters, I think, depending on which terrain layouts they adopt, I think can go up a little bit. I think they might hit around 50, 53.
World Eaters are just, much like the Army, the World Eaters are just swingy in general, I think. If you get a whole bunch of players that get first turn every now and again, that one way to probably spike a little bit again.
So I think that World Eaters face a similar issue to Space Marines in that a lot of the World Eaters players, they say, I'm going first, I'm going to do +2 movement, advance, and charge, and I'm going to run at my opponent, and that's going to put you around a 50% win rate against players of equal skill.
I feel like you're attacking me here.
I'm talking about a lot of World Eaters players. I don't do it enough. I don't just go Speed Force 5 and go at my opponent enough, and I fully, I had a conversation with Fabian about it. I'm like, yeah, I don't go overly aggressive enough for World Eaters, so I usually play 2 kg. It works for me for the most part with my playstyle, but most people are just like, oh, gotta yeet, gotta go fast, Sonic the Hedgehog style. And I think that that's dragging the win rate down. But World Eaters are a very good army in my opinion. And I think that if the terrain, like these deployments are closer, the terrain is closer, I think this is just a good day to eat for a World Eater.
Yeah, so I'm curious to see what's going to be below 45% once all this shakes out, because there's only 4 armies there, and at least 3 of those armies are going to be above 45%.
Yeah, I think that most armies have play right now, I think, and that's a great place to be. It's a great game right now.
So final thoughts, anybody?
I think it's a great change. Outside of Pivot, everything has been net positive, but they did a lot of changes, and having so many of them hit home is really impressive.
Pivot and Archons are really the only 2 losers, right?
Yeah.
But that's obviously just an oversight. It's not like they tested it and like, oh, this is what it should be. So I'm sure that will come out in an FAQ or in RAD or something.
Oh, sorry, a third loser. There's a core rule with the free strats that if your ability does not call out a specific stratagem to be used, you cannot use it twice. The Pure Tide Engram Neurochip, for our longtime listeners who know I love this relic for Tau, says, Tau Empire Battlesuit model, you may target this unit with a stratagem, even if you have targeted another unit with this stratagem. Now no longer does that, because of the core rule change. It doesn't call out a specific strat. So you could pay 25 points to give your unit an enhancement that doesn't do anything.
Just to stun on people. Like,
Yeah.
I had 25 points. I just throw 5 points away. That's your handicap.
They continue to make the worst enhancement in the entire game worse. Congratulations, GW, you've done it.
They're going to come out with an FAQ like, if you take this enhancement, you cannot target this unit with stratagems at all.
It should just be like +1 CP per battle round. I would take that.
Yeah, that'd be great. That's a great enhancement. I would take that too.
So I think we covered about everything we need to cover this go-round. For the regular listeners, we're going to be off an extra week because someone has to go out of town, namely me. So next recording is going to be in 3 weeks rather than 2, and we'll do a back-to-back recording for those couple of weeks. Otherwise, I hope everybody has a good weekend, good week, good games, enjoy the updates, and complain about orcs on the Discord that you can join if you click the link in the show notes. Otherwise, you can contact us at openplaypodcast@gmail.com. You can find the podcast everywhere. I have it linked everywhere. And when we come back, we'll talk about some 40K and probably some Age of Sigmar, because you got a new edition coming out very soon.
Yeah, Preston won't be able to have anything to say, but we're going to talk about Age of Sigmar.
I like Age of Sigmar, so we'll definitely talk about it. At least me and Will. Y'all can just listen like we listen to Will talk about orcs. But yeah, everybody have a good weekend, and have a good night, y'all.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a good one.
See ya.
See you guys.